So welcome everybody. Thanks so much for showing up and being a part of this today. First, I want to just give a shout out to Jenny and Brooke and all the other Oak staff members. They just do such a fantastic job, and they've taken the organization in an amazing direction in just 6 years. So let's just give them a round of applause for just all the amazing work they do, and everybody else involved in Oak. Thank you all so much. So in the movie The Matrix, do you all remember the scene where Neo he's in a training program and he gets like downloaded how to do kung fu? Does anybody remember what he says after that? When he kind of wakes up out of the training program, does anybody remember what he says? He just goes in a very Keanu Reeves dude accent. He just goes, "I know kung fu." And so after today, I want you all to leave this and be like, "I know fruit." So I've done a number of presentations here at KSU, and you all are stuck with me for the next 3 hours. So if I do anything inappropriate, that's kind of to be expected. And I've definitely had to be reminded of that before at KSU. So bear with me here. So who is marketing fruits or wants to market fruit? So around half the people here. Who's actively marketing fruit? A couple people? Okay, great. So we're going to dive into successful fruit growing in Kentucky, and we're focusing on small fruits today. So I own and operate Peaceful Heritage Nursery, LLC. So we're a naturally grown farm. I grow everything under organic standards, but we're not certified organic. We trial and grow over 20 species of fruits and nuts and over 150 cultivars. I also raise organic honeybees. So we're always searching for superior performing fruit plants to add to our nursery. And we operate a local pickup and mail order specialty nursery. So I do about 10% of my business in-state and about 90% out-of-state. We supply Sustainable Berea, Good Foods Co-op in Lexington, and have supplied Baker Creek Seeds with products. And so it's our aim to supply local families, farms, and homesteads with superior genetics, excellent plants, accurate information, and honest service. This is my book, The Berry Grower. So that's available in softcover or ebook on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. So please purchase a new copy if you're interested in the book, or an ebook. That way I benefit from the purchase, and that supports my work. I also wrote Paw Paws, the complete growing and marketing guide. It's also available online. So what are small fruits? So small fruits are fruits that are grown on vines, shrubs, and bushes. So we're not talking about tree fruits here, although we will discuss mulberries a little bit. Mostly we're talking about fruits that grow on perennial plants that aren't trees. So what are some of the advantages of small fruits? They're resilient, they're reliable, they're hardy. So small fruits tend to bloom later than trees, so this is crucially important. Many small fruit flower buds tend to be able to withstand some freezing during bloom. So this is also crucially important, especially here in Kentucky. Small fruits grow on smaller plants, so they're easier to maintain and take up much less room than trees. Easier to harvest, easier to prune and maintain. You don't have to get up on ladders, easy to take the tiny twigs off when you're pruning. They usually begin bearing within 1 to 3 years. And trees, generally are going to take 3 to 5 years just to get started. So small fruits are also often extremely high in antioxidants and healthful phytonutrients. They generally freeze and process very well. There's a huge and lucrative market for locally grown small fruits basically anywhere in the country. And they're easy to cover with bird netting, so this is sometimes necessary. So Kentucky's a challenging place to grow fruit. And I've found this out after over 20 years of doing this. So the question's why. Okay, so we have late frost, we have rainy spring weather, we have high disease pressure, wildlife pressure, insect pressure, and heavy soils. So you have to expect both some success as well as failure. Some years, certain crops are going to do great. Other years, not so much. So diversity is therefore very important. So many of these issues can be curtailed if you choose species and varieties that are naturally acclimated to Kentucky and that do well without labor-intensive management, like lots of spraying, etc. It's often easier to grow fruit in urban locations rather than rural locations, which was a big surprise to me, because in the city you're going to have a warmer microclimate, less late frost, you have windbreak with so many buildings and trees around, and you have a lot less disease, insect, and wildlife pressure in an urban situation. So tree fruits can be successful in Kentucky, however, there are some setbacks. So those setbacks are the late frosts that often destroy the blooms, the heavy disease and insect pressure. Okay, so today it's, January 25th and it's 60 degrees outside in Kentucky. It's not supposed to go below 40 degrees for the next 3 or 4 days. And so that's enough warmth to cause stone fruits to start to bud, especially things like apricots, almonds. That's why you don't see those things grown in Kentucky. Even some peaches might even be prone to budding, or cherries in this sort of condition, which of course is not going to allow them to produce fruit because it's going to freeze again here in just a week or so. So this presentation is about growing and utilizing species of small fruit that are naturally acclimated to Kentucky. So getting started, here's a list of some small fruit species that are suitable for Kentucky. Blackberry, raspberry, strawberry, gooseberry, honeyberry, Juneberry, aka serviceberry, mulberry, which is the one tree fruit we're going to talk about, native passion fruit, elderberry, cold hardy figs in high tunnels, disease-resistant grapes, sort of, Aronia, black currant, and blueberries under ideal conditions. So we'll look at each one of these in detail later on, so don't worry about trying to write down that entire list right now. So when you're getting started, you need to ask yourself a few questions. So those questions could be, what fruits do I want to grow? Why do I want to grow fruit? Do I hope to market fruit? How much suitable space do I have? How much time and resources can I invest in this? Because remember, most small fruits are going to take at least a year or two to get into production. There are some exceptions we'll look at, but this is not exactly a long game thing like tree fruits, but it is something that's going to take a couple of years to get going. So your strongest fresh marketing potentials are going to be blackberries, raspberries, blueberries, strawberries. So obviously those are the most common fruits that you're typically going to be seeing in the market. Strong niche marketing potential, cold hardy figs. And there's a few things that are going to require a little bit of extra marketing and educational work, but that have a lot of potential in Kentucky. So that's gooseberries, currants, passion fruit, mulberries, and Juneberry. And then there's some that have a potential for value-added goods, elderberry, Aronia, and really all the above can be processed into value-added goods. But elderberry and Aronia, it's pretty much you're going to have to process those in order to make a sellable product in general. So one thing to remember is that nursery catalogs and websites are in business to sell you plants, regardless of whether those plants will succeed in Kentucky or not. Most will not. Many claims and nursery catalogs and websites are false, so you must choose a nursery wisely. Okay, so check reviews, check credentials. Don't just find some online nursery with stuff that sounds good and just start buying it. We'll go into more detail about that here in just a bit. So how do we start? So if you're brand new or fairly new, I recommend starting in your front or backyard. Or if you're planning on marketing, start relatively small. Start with berries. Berries are easy to establish, fun, forgiving of errors, and usually produce fruit in only 1 year from planting. So let's say you narrow it down to blackberries and raspberries as your target species. Now you need to understand cultivars. Okay, so variety, cultivar, it's not exactly synonymous, but these days in modern lingo it pretty much is. So we're just going to call cultivars varieties. And that just means the name selection of a certain species. So you've got Granny Smith and Fuji, are varieties or cultivars of apple. Okay, so the species is Malus domestica. The varieties are Granny Smith and Fuji. Is this confusing to anybody? Does everybody get this? Okay, cool. So those are all some interesting varieties of figs there in that photo from our farm. So various species respond to their environment in shockingly different ways. Okay, so therefore you must select varieties suited to Kentucky's challenging climate, or the plants will likely completely fail. So choose your variety suited to your desired end goal. Okay, that's another factor you have to think about. So fresh fruit, processing, home use, etc. What I mean by this is some varieties might produce fruit that is delicious and nice, but it's really soft and leaks juice. And so that's not going to be a marketing variety, whereas one that maybe is not as juicy but a little bit tougher, that's going to be a better marketing variety that's going to be able to withstand some shipment and handling, unlike ones that might just leak juice and get soft and become mush by the time they get to the farmer's market, which isn't going to go over well with customers. So that's another factor to think about. So you want to narrow down suitable cultivars by researching. A good place to start is University of Kentucky or KSU fruit growing documents found online. You can also get those printed at your local ag office, extension office. My website also has a good list per species, and that's peacefulheritage.com. Another good resource is growingfruit.org. Okay, this is a really neat website. It's an online forum you can join. There's fruit geeks and fruit growers from all over the world on there. And I've met some local people that way. So you can make some local connections. You can get on there. You can ask any question you want. Somebody's probably going to answer. So that's a nice resource. You can also check with other local growers, local U-Picks, local organic farmers. So these are places to go to say, hey, I really like your blueberries. You know, what varieties are you growing? Or these blackberries are amazing. What's your favorite variety of blackberry? So you can sort of inquire with local farmers and U-Picks to see what they grow successfully, because they've probably done their homework, especially if they're having success. You might ask them. So remember, you don't have to figure it all out yourself. So you can go to the university publications, talk to local growers, check my website, ask me questions too, and there's a lot of resources to help you out. So you definitely want to research any cultivars that you're interested in and species, and make sure you make an educated decision, not a random or hasty one. So I know this time of year, I start to get absorbed in catalogs and websites and stuff, and sometimes things sound so great, but you got to remember Kentucky's conditions are really challenging, so you don't want to just randomly choose a species or a variety, but do some research. So we're going to talk a little bit about site selection. So after selecting suitable species and varieties, the next most important step is selecting a good planting site. So if you select a poor or low quality site, your success will be constrained by that site's limitations and suitability for fruit production. So we don't need perfection, but this is basically what we're aiming for. Full sun to mostly full sun exposure. So this means direct, unimpeded sunlight. So this is actually the most important aspect, because you can't grow anything unless you have sunlight. You can have, soil can be amended, beds can be made, you can grow things in containers, etc. But if you don't have sun, you don't have anything going for you there. So you need at least 7 to 8 hours per day of direct, unimpeded sunshine. And there's a few species such as gooseberry, currants, and honeyberry that can do well with less hours of direct sun. But in general, for most fruits, the more sun, the better. So this is basically sums it up. And what I mean by less fruit is that the less sun, the less direct sunlight you have, the less the plants are going to be able to produce. So you're going to see lower yields with less sun. Okay, number 2, good water drainage. So that's challenging in Kentucky. How many growers do we have here that are not in Kentucky? Like, I know you're in Kentucky currently, but how many are not based in Kentucky? Just one. Where are you based out of? Okay, so that's practically the same as here. A little bit colder maybe. So the site must have a reasonably low water table. Okay, so in Kentucky we have really high water tables a lot of places. The first place I farmed, the water table was like 6 inches under the ground. So it can't be swampy or have heavy, wet, mucky soil that shows sign of anaerobic activity, such as that gray color. I don't know if you've ever seen that. Mucky soils tend to have this grayish color. That's not a good sign. And after heavy rains, does it hold water, or is it drained within a few hours? So this can be somewhat amended through installing tile pipes for drainage 6 to 12 months before planting. Is there anybody here that doesn't know what tile pipes are? Okay. 3, open and clear of trees, and ideally lacks pernicious weed species or other difficult plants. So examples would be Johnson grass, bindweed, pokeberry, multiflora rose. Basically, I just named everything on my farm besides fruit. And prolific amounts of wild blackberry and morning glory. I don't want to forget about those two. So if serious infestations are present, I'd recommend mowing it, tarping it, cover cropping it for a couple seasons, or be prepared to use landscape fabric. So these are some additional things that are highly beneficial. A slight slope to facilitate drainage of cold air. A soil depth of at least 2 to 3 feet before you hit limestone or shale or water, etc. Proximity to irrigation access, very important. And is it fenceable if necessary? Because deer also enjoy a lot of these plants, and some of them they don't. So we're going to talk about that also. And 8, is it on leased or borrowed land? So do you feel safe investing in crops that are long-term and may not give returns for 2 to 3 years or more? So this is a super impressive drawing I did. Went on my mom's fridge. So this is land suited for fruit production. So the top part there is going to be generally too steep, too windy. The middle portion of a slope is going to be the best suited. It's got full sun, a low water table, slightly sloped, higher ground. Poor site's going to be too low lying, frost prone, shaded, high water table. This one here. So the top of the hill again, it's too windy, soils are thin. The optimal area is going to be right in the middle, because cold air and frosty air, it sinks, right? So hot air rises, cold air sinks, and so cold frosty air is going to settle down in the lowest portions of your land. So that's going to be the riparian area where you've got creeks, river, or just the bottom of a slope. And you can see this in action, like when you go out on a cold evening that's above freezing, but it's going to go below freezing, you'll watch the lower areas will start getting covered in frost before the upper areas do. So you want to avoid planting in that lower area any type of fruit tree or berry plant if possible, because it's much more likely they're going to get hit with late frost. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about climate change. So just look outside. Okay, so Kentucky's climate's been more volatile and is apparently undergoing some reoccurring shifts. So what does this look like for Kentucky fruit growers? So these are some things I've observed over the years. Fluctuating winter temperatures, that's probably always happened in Kentucky, but it seems to be getting a little bit worse in terms of March can be either 50 degrees or 75 degrees, and that's problematic. Basically because when the weather warms up, the plants are going to start budding, and you don't want plants and fruit trees budding out in March. And even early April is risky. And so this is something that we don't have control over. However, there are some things we can do. Like one thing is choosing plants that are later blooming, and also focusing on these small fruit plants that we're going to go into that can handle late frost and freeze. Okay, so the earlier warm-ups, late freezes, right. The summers seem to be getting rainier in Kentucky. It seems like June gets really wet, and summer of 22 and 23 were extremely wet. In my area, it rained every couple of days in 2022. I don't know if you all remember that. It was just like raining every other day. This increases disease pressure. August to September can be extremely hot and dry, so we can get into drought conditions. I remember back in 2019, I think it was like 80, 90 degrees every single day with no rain all through August and September. And actually, those conditions are good for fruit plants. That's why most of the fruit production's in California, because it's hot and dry, which makes the fruit sweeten up and reduces disease pressure. So that's actually advantageous. But it can also damage establishing plants or drop production when plants lack irrigation. Okay, so you don't want your entire planting to dry up and die. So all these conditions we're talking about with climate change, it doesn't bode very well for tree fruits in Kentucky because they're more sensitive to these fluctuations. And however, despite all this, the small fruit plants on our farm continue to thrive and produce reliably despite all this. So the only intervention that I do pretty much is just covering strawberries that row cover. So these are honeyberry blooms in the picture here. And I witnessed these in full bloom like that, and it went down to 14 degrees. Did not damage the crop. Not sure if it was 100% crop, but they still put on a crop of berries, which I was really impressed with that. So I've also seen it frost hard and freeze when blackberries and gooseberries are in full bloom. No problem. Grapes and blueberries are not frost sensitive, and they get severely damaged. So what can be done? Small fruits, diversify, have some protection on hand, row covers, mist systems of growing small fruits that might require it. Misting systems left on all night will coat buds in ice. So ice releases heat all night if it's dripping with water. So this is a mulberry here that was budding out, and this was 2021, I think, and it was going to freeze that night. So I turned on a mist system and misted the plants all night long. They got completely frozen in ice like that, and you'd think what would happen is when that ice melts, that would turn brown and fall off, but it didn't. That ice melted, and the buds continued to grow, and we're fine. So it's amazing because ice actually releases heat. So the key is that it has to be dripping with water all night long. You can see all the frozen grass in the background. So it has to be dripping with water all night long. And if you're interested in this, you can go to that link. It's Michigan State University did a study on this for blueberry growers. And they have a whole info sheet there on that, so you can go there to learn more about that. Okay, your other option are smudge pots. And so these are for heating orchards. Okay, they're expensive. They're fossil fuel powered. They're the only viable option with fruit trees to keep frost off of the blooms. Okay, so this is the Mordor-looking picture here of somebody burning these in their orchard. So, it works, but it's really expensive, and it's just not really that attractive, but that's what commercial growers do. So, in my opinion, the best approach is to plant resilient small fruiting plants. So tree fruits are much riskier, especially for marketing purposes, okay? Two exceptions to that would be American persimmons and pawpaws, and also chestnuts. They're not actually nut trees, they're more like a fruit tree. So those three trees actually do quite well in Kentucky. And someone canceled, they weren't able to come tomorrow, so I got asked to give another presentation, so I'll be giving a presentation on growing pawpaws tomorrow. So if pawpaws are an interest, you can try to check that out tomorrow afternoon. Okay, so sometimes the microclimate effect will protect fruit trees and plants. So my farm site is apparently like the opposite of a beneficial microclimate because it's always colder at my site by a couple of degrees. So if the weather forecast says it's going to be 20 degrees, it's going to be 18 at my farm or 19 every time. And I have a lot of problems with late frost, which is fine because I don't grow fruit for fruit's sake. I'm growing the plants because I want the twigs and I want to trial things to see what will actually produce. So the fact that the conditions are a little bit rougher for fruit production is actually beneficial for my purposes. But I've seen fruit trees on my property do terrible, and 20 miles away, they're doing just fine. So there's a lot of microclimates in Kentucky, elevation, etc. So we're going to touch on organic fertility management. Okay, so you want to select the best possible site. Duh. Soil test may provide useful insight. Observation, so what's growing there already? How's the health of the crops or the vegetation on site? So or do you see like nice pasture grasses growing? That's generally a good sign that you've got a suitable site. Or do you see things like sage grass and cattails and rushes and sedges and things like that? Those are signs that there's some pH issues, there's some drainage issues. So look at what's growing on site. You can also go to the USDA Web Soil Survey. So I believe I touch on that later. Okay, so selecting the best possible site. So while you may be limited to one plot of land, you can often find variations in soil type and fertility even on a 1 acre plot. So like here at KSU, there's all sorts of different soil types. There's areas where the limestone is just a foot underground. There's places where it's 10 feet underground. So try to locate the planting on the best spot that has full sun and good drainage. So soil test may help you understand the site. Personally, I don't really rely on soil tests or even get them done. Besides, when I first got this farm 7 years ago, I did a soil test or something, and I didn't really pay any attention to it. Honestly, it's not really my thing. But maybe you like soil tests; they can be helpful. I recommend using a third-party lab that specializes in organic fertility management. Also want to mention, if you all have any questions, just go ahead and ask them openly whenever. Just raise your hand and ask a question. You don't have to wait till the end. Okay, so I touched on this earlier. So this is sage grass, as it's called in Kentucky, growing all over this field. There's some issues there with probably calcium and pH that are showing that. So, the weeds and vegetation can tell you a lot about the soil type and soil pH as well as the general fertility. And also, was this topsoil removed? That's something you might want to consider also. Okay, so this is the USDA Web Soil Survey website. This is an amazing resource. And it's a little tricky to use because it's a government website. I don't know, like they never progressed past like 1998. But once you figure out how to use it, it's an amazing tool. So you can actually go on this website and look at any location in the United States, and you can zoom in to like an acre size plot, and it'll tell you what the soil type is on that spot. So this is an amazing thing. And how they put all this together, I have no idea, but you should check that out. So the soil type can help you ascertain if soil organic matter is low, and it can help you develop a fertility program. For instance, sandy soils are low in organic matter and clay, both of which hold moisture and provide nutrients. So sandy soil is going to require more fertility, and you also want to focus heavily on building soil organic matter by things like utilizing cover crops. Okay, so this is a cowpea cover crop here. And cowpea is extremely easy to grow as a cover crop. So leguminous cover crops, those are going to provide substantial nitrogen and soil organic matter. In previous eras, land was cover crop before orchard crops were planted. So that's just how they used to do it, especially with trees and apple orchards. So if you're not feeling urgency, you should highly consider doing some amount of cover cropping. So you can cover crop all winter long and terminate it in the spring before planting. Annual rye, this is some ryegrass cover crop I planted. You can mix it with about 80% annual rye, 20% hairy vetch, and Austrian winter pea. That works great in Kentucky. You can do that in October or so, November. And you can grow that all winter long. Or if you want to do a summer cover crop, cowpea, sun hemp, mung bean, soybean, those all work great. And also another one that's not a nitrogen fixer, but sorghum Sudan grass is also a really good biomass building cover crop for Kentucky growers. So finished compost is great, okay, but it's usually not enough for optimum growth and production. So usually you need an additional source of nitrogen other than compost. So use compost liberally as you have access to it. I don't really have much access to compost, so I use very little compost. Although if I had access, I would use dump truck loads of it. But you can also supplement with other sources of NPK and calcium and trace minerals. Okay, so some of these would be granulated chicken manure, which is very high in nitrogen. That's my fertilizer of choice. Fish emulsion, it's very fast acting and high in nitrogen. There's different meals like bone meal, blood meal, feather meal, etc. Shell meal, crab meal, things like that. Those are all really good organic fertilizers. You also have veganic options. So there's a water-soluble soy fertilizer. That's what's pictured here. And that's an incredible product. It dissolves in water, so it's water-soluble. It doesn't clog misters or sprayers or anything like that. And I've had incredible results using this stuff. And I order that from Seven Springs Farm. They ship it right to your door. And there's some various other options too. This one is 1600. There's another one I use at 777. And what I like about it is I used to use fish emulsion. Fish emulsion is a little gross to work with. It's smelly. It can cause a lot of biofilm buildup. This stuff is nice and clean. Just smells like yeast or like beer kind of. No problem with any buildup or residue. Alfalfa meal, soybean meal, rock minerals, and kelp for micronutrients. All solid options. Kelp should generally be used regardless. I use Kelpit brand kelp extract as a foliar feed at least one time per year. So at least one time per year, I will use Kelpit, kelp extract, Maxicrop's another option. So when you're using kelp, you've got different options. So some of them are like the one that I use is like a resin. It comes in like a block, and then you mix it with water, and you get your extract. They sell it in jugs, but that's just a waste of money because you're just paying for water. You can get like this resin and use that. And kelp extract absorbs really quickly into plant tissue. So you spray it on in the morning on the foliage, and the foliage absorbs nutrients far more efficiently than the roots. So it's great for correcting any micronutrient deficiencies that might be in your soil, and will increase the bricks and sugar content of fruit and vegetables. So this is something I learned the hard way. Only fertilize your plants after all danger frost is over. Okay, so if you go out there in early April on a nice warm day and you start slinging the fertilizer around, it can stimulate the plants to more rapidly bud. And if the frost danger isn't over, you're just making things worse for the plant because that growth can get burned off. So only do that after all danger frost is over. Uh-huh. Either one. Yeah, either one. So I do both. So I use that in the nursery. I put it through the mist system. You can put it through drip tape, anything like that. As long as it's mixed together, there's no problem with it clogging. Okay, so mulch. Obviously, it adds substantial amounts of organic matter, increases soil life over time as it's annually applied. High soil organic matter in mulch helps retain fertility, prevents leaching of nutrients in rainstorms, reduces mud splash on foliage, reduces erosion, etc. So it's always a great option. If you don't have access to organic mulch, or it's just too much to apply because like I have like 500 fruit trees on my property, I can't apply organic mulch to every single one numerous times for the year. So I use landscape fabric for most of the plantings. So that's another option, and I believe we'll go into that later. So foliage nutrient testing. So long-term monitoring of nutrient levels can be done via harvesting fresh foliage and sending it to a lab. So basically there's labs that specialize in foliage nutrient testing. You just clip off some leaves, put them in a Ziploc bag, mail it to the lab, and they'll give you a nutrient analysis. Okay, this is something that was at the top of the list we saw in there of people's concerns. So we're going to talk a little bit about this. Okay, so again, selecting the best possible site. Why? Because on the best possible site, there's going to be the less factors that are going to cause stress, because any amount of stress is going to increase pest and disease pressure, sometimes very substantially. So if you've got late frost happening, if you've got water drainage issues, you've got wind issues, those things are going to increase the stress on the plant and make it more of a magnet to diseases and insects. 2, selecting adapted and disease-resistant species and varieties. So some species might be prone to disease, but there might be certain cultivars that are more disease-resistant. For instance, apples are a great example of that. Some varieties are super prone to disease. Some can handle disease pressure. 3, hygiene and cultural practices. And 4, organic products when necessary. So this is an IPM pyramid that I made. And so the bottom is the most important, and then the things get, there's less emphasis going up. Okay, so your foundation for pest and disease pressure should always be prevention. So resistant cultivars, proper planting, correct species. Okay, so like the old saying goes, an ounce of prevention prevents a pound of cure. Next is your cultural and sanitation factors. So pruning, training, thinning out fruit, thinning out canes, and good hygiene. That doesn't mean your hygiene, like showering in the morning, although that's important too. What I mean is sanitation, so cleaning, pruning tools, not leaving clippings around. Very important. Physical, mechanical. Okay, so this is going to be things like fencing, drones. Okay, they make drones now that can scare off pests. Okay, like birds. You can fly a drone out to scare off birds, and netting for bird protection also. So your next line of defense is going to be biological things like bacillus bacteria, like BT products, predatory insects. Okay, so releasing ladybugs, praying mantises, etc. And then your last line of defense should be spraying stuff. Okay, so there's these days the organic product, the science of organic products is really gone to next level. So there's really an organic spray for practically everything, but you got to remember those sprays are going to cost money, and there are some complications there. Okay, so we covered that. Covered this. Okay, so with hygiene, like I was saying, you want to rapidly remove any dead, dying, or infested plants. Okay, so anytime you're removing anything that's diseased or been damaged, it's got to go. You can't just pile it up and leave it there for the next 6 months. You should burn it, or you can chip it, you can bury it, you can take it off site. Whatever it takes, it's got to go. There's an invasive insect called the Asian ambrosia beetle, and they're very drawn towards piles of dead limbs and clippings and things, and you don't want these things coming into your orchard. Also, things like funguses can grow on those twigs and branches that can then go and attack living tissue. Not so much. I mean, those are different species, and typically, if you buy firewood, it should be somewhat dried already, but I've never seen that issue with firewood, but that's a good question. Okay, another aspect of sanitation and hygiene is purchasing disease-free plants from reputable sources. Okay, you don't want to just go dig up a bunch of raspberry plants from your friend's backyard to start your new raspberry planting. That's a really bad idea. And this is an aspect of biosecurity. So when you buy potted plants, they can be okay, but they can also harbor diseases, insects, weeds in the soil, weed seeds. You never know what's in that soil that you're getting from a nursery or from somebody that plant comes in. So I've unintentionally introduced new weeds onto my property through purchasing potted plants, and I'm just about gotten rid of them, but it was challenging to get rid of them for sure. And then we mentioned organic products. Okay, so Pyganic's one of my favorites. It's made from chrysanthemum daisies. It's great for taking down Japanese beetles and a bunch of other insects. So there's nothing wrong with resorting to organic pest control products. However, you should ask, okay, what led to this issue? And is it based off not following 1 through 3? Okay, so what's on the topic of Japanese beetles? Okay, what led to this issue? In the early 1900s, they imported camellias from Japan in big pots of soil, and in that soil were Japanese beetle larvae, and they hatched out of there, and now they're in every backyard in the country practically. So again, biosecurity. So the other aspect of organic products is that they're expensive, and they have a few risks, such as killing pollinators. So Pyganic would definitely kill honeybees and other things. So you got to be really careful with it, use it properly, and use it as a sort of a last resort. These are some other organic products. Spinosad, there's a lot of BT products on the market. Or you can make your own from local products and plants. So I don't know if you all have heard of this, Jadam, but I was a little skeptical at first, but then I started watching this guy's videos, and I bought his book, and it's amazing. This is an amazing book, and you can buy that on Amazon and other places. And he's a Korean natural farmer that has figured out and invented a lot of things, and he's also compiled information from other growers of how to make organic, natural pest control products from all sorts of different plants. So really, really neat stuff. Definitely worth looking into this. Okay, so just to summarize this. So you're going to select the best possible site, selecting adapted and disease-resistant species and varieties, hygiene and cultural practices, and organic products when necessary. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Rubbing alcohol. Yep. So what I'll do is I will, like if I'm going out and pruning an orchard or I've got a lot of cuttings to take, I'll take, so first of all, I'll take the pruners, sharpen them really nicely, and then at least once a season I take a metal brush and just scrub them really hard. You can take them apart like Felcos. You can take them apart, scrub them really hard to get all the gunk and stuff off, and then I'll put rubbing alcohol in a spray bottle, and then I'll just spray it down, just give it a little in between each, plant or different species, and that helps with that helps prevent the transmission of disease through the mechanical cutting of it. I just do it straight. Yeah. That's a good question. Probably not. I mean, 70% would probably work just fine. Some people might use bleach, but bleach can be hard on metals.
I just wanted to say a thing about this 70 and 90. It's kind of silly. A couple years ago, I was watching a video where this guy underneath the microscope was comparing 70 versus 90% alcohol to things. And I guess apparently the 90% evaporates so quickly that it's not killing things off as well as just using the 70%.
Interesting.
I don't know.
Yep.
Something to think about.
Yep. Did you all hear that? Okay. So now we're getting to the fun part of the presentation. So we're going to explore some small fruits for Kentucky. Okay, so we're going to talk about brambles a little bit first. So brambles are rose family members. So this is Rosaceae. So they're fruiting perennial plants. So other plants that are in Rosaceae family are, of course, roses, but then you've got apples, pears, peaches, plums, strawberries, blackberries, raspberries, quince, medlar. There's a ton of rose family members. So some of these bramble plants can live for about 8 to 10 years, maybe longer under ideal conditions. The plants are aggregates consisting of drupelets, meaning what appears to be one fruit is actually a conglomeration or aggregate of many small individual fruits, drupelets, each containing one seed. So technically they're not berries, but commonly referred to as berries. So this is just plant geek stuff. But it's interesting to know that a blackberry is actually an aggregate of many small fruits, it's not actually a fruit. It's not even actually a berry, but it's made of berries. So most brambles do very well in Kentucky. Okay, this includes blackberries, red and black raspberries, as well as some hybrids, and also more obscure species such as wineberry. Okay, so these are a few terms to learn. Primocane and floricane. Okay, so this is very easy. Primo means first or early, such as in premier or prime. Flori means flowering. Okay, so primocanes are new canes that just sprouted this season at ground level. All brambles make new primocanes every spring. Okay, so these are primocanes coming up from the base of a plant, a blackberry. Okay, floricanes are 1-year-old canes, so they're primocanes 1 year later, and that overwintered and will bloom and bear fruit. They were primocanes last year when they were new canes. Most brambles bear fruit only on floricanes that are 1 year old. Modern breeding has introduced primocane-bearing brambles. Okay, so they flower and fruit on new canes, primocanes, usually in late summer. These have potential and also some setbacks. Okay, so I'm going to test you all here. The shoots that come up out of the ground that spring, what are those called? Okay, and then a year later, what are they called? Yep. Okay, so primocane blackberries, like I said, they'll flower and fruit on the cane that came up that year, on the primocanes. But a problem with them is that when temperatures are in the 90s during the time when they bloom in the middle of the summer, it's often too hot and they don't set fruit properly. Okay, so that's a complication with them, and it's probably a lack of pollen generation during the heat, because scientists have recently learned that pollen generation doesn't happen on a lot of fruits when it's 90 degrees plus. Okay, so we're going to look into some bramble species now. I'm going to start with blackberries. Okay, so just so you all know, most of the pictures in the presentation today are from the farm. There's a few that aren't, but most of them are from the farm. Okay, so blackberries are easy to grow and very cold hardy. They're excellent for beginner growers, and they produce fruit 1 year from planting. Through breeding, the fruit has become much larger, but also sweeter and less bitter or sour. So it's an unusual thing where the breeding has made the fruit bigger, but also better. Normally, the opposite happens. Breeders make things bigger, and they have less flavor. Okay, so most varieties are complex hybrids, and there's many species of blackberries. Wild blackberry vines abound in Kentucky, but the fruit quality is usually pretty mediocre, and the size is also usually kind of small. There's a very small wild foraged market in some areas. That's kind of disappearing. They suffer relatively few serious problems in Kentucky, but they do have a few challenges we're going to look at. The plants get large and require trellising. You're going to put them about 6 to 8 feet apart, depending on the type. West Coast varieties and hybrids do not do well in Kentucky. Okay, so this includes Marionberry, Tayberry, Boysenberry. These aren't really for Kentucky growers. You might get a couple berries, but they don't really produce much. Thorny types produce the most fruit and also deter deer. They're also to deal with. Blackberries ripen from mid-June to September and have solid fresh market potential. And Kentucky food culture embraces blackberries. Okay, so there's 3 main types of blackberries. Besides thornless and thorny, you've got erect, semi-erect, and trailing. So erect grow upwards and have woody canes, often reaching over 6 feet tall. You can think of them as determinate, like a tomato. Semi-erect, these grow upwards, but tend to get viney at the top and can flop around a bit. And then trailing types are kind of like the indeterminate variety of blackberries, because they just grow profusely. They can grow 10 to 20 feet in a season, and mostly these are West Coast types. Okay, so most blackberries for Kentucky are going to be the first two, erect or semi-erect. So modern thornless hybrids produce high yields of delicious sweet berries, so there's little reason to plant thorny blackberries unless deer protection and absolute highest yields are your prerogative. You plant in full sun or nearly full sun locations only. Being a pioneer species, they're not tolerant of much shade. So if you think about it, like when you clear a field, one of the first things you're going to see come up is blackberries. So they're pioneer species. They want full sun. And you also want to avoid wet areas and frost pockets. Clay soil or loam's best. Slightly acidic soil is fine also. They're very adaptable plants. There's early, mid, and late varieties. These can stretch the harvest window from mid-June all the way to September. Okay, so let's look at pruning and training the vines. And I will say, late producing berries, including late producing varieties of something like blackberry, those are going to be more prone to spotted winged Drosophila. So that's a little invasive fruit fly that really likes to infest berries. So your early berries that ripen in June and July, you're not going to see really any spotted winged Drosophila, but into August and on, spotted winged Drosophila is going to be, it can be an issue. Okay, so this is a document put out by UK. You can just Google that, growing blackberries and raspberries in Kentucky. That'll be the first thing that pops up. And it's an excellent guide that tells you basically everything you need to know about growing blackberries and raspberries in Kentucky. It doesn't go into great detail, but it tells you all the basics. And this is pulled from that document. This is a basic primer on training, pruning, and trellising the plants here. So you've got a 6-foot tall trellis. You got a wire at 3 feet. You got a wire at 6 feet. And what this is showing is how to prune the plants. So you probably won't remember if I tell you, so you can just read the document. Okay, so with cultivars, the Arkansas University varieties are the way to go. So they're all named after Native American tribes. So you've got Arapaho, Ouachita, Ponca, Caddo, Osage, Kiowa. They're excellent. Arapaho is a really nice one. It does well here. It's a very early blackberry, and the plant is really erect, so it grows like a little tree. The berries are very high quality and big and sweet. Ouachita is an excellent mid-season variety. Kiowa produces amazingly big, large, juicy fruit for a long season. It's also intensely thorny. I mean, even the leaves have thorns. I do like that one, though. I grow it. Chester is a really neat one, too. It's a perfect backyard variety because it's got a really long season. It's got really good flavor, but it's not for marketing because the berries are a little small and a little soft. That might be Chester on that picture there, but it's a really nice one. The flavor's good, and it produces for a really long time. So if you want a backyard blackberry, that's a good one. There's some newer varieties that we're trialing that just recently were released. Galaxy, Twilight, and Ponca. These are brand new. And the Primacane varieties, I'd recommend those for just like a small trial basis only. And personally, I haven't had good long-term experience with Triple Crown. That's a very common variety that a lot of people in Kentucky grow in their backyard. It hasn't really worked that well for me. So pests and diseases. Okay, the biggest insect issue in Kentucky are redneck borers. Okay, these aren't locals of power equipment. That's the name of an insect. It's a little beetle, and it lays its eggs on the canes, and this is what the canes look like. So I don't know if you've ever seen that on blackberries before, but it makes these bulges like that. And it basically destroys the entire cane. Definitely anything below that cane or above that cane is going to be shot typically. June beetles and Japanese beetles also eat the fruit. So in the middle of the summer, there would be June beetles, you know, those big scarab type beetles, the green ones, shiny ones. Those will be just gorging on blackberries. So redneck borer infests the canes, okay? And birds can peck at some of the berries, but bird damage is usually pretty minimal. So if you ever see canes that look like this with the redneck borer damage, it's best to prune them out as soon as possible and burn them. Well, by the time the fruit's ripening, it's done blooming. So blackberries bloom, their bloom season's not very long. So they bloom, and then the berries are coming out. You could spray like pyganic or something. Pyganic evaporates or breaks down really fast. I'll talk about this in the next slide here. So it breaks down in sunlight within a few hours. So you could spray it. It's always any kind of spraying that you want to do, and this is something that he talks about in the Jadam book, is whenever you're doing any kind of spraying, whether it's a fertilizer spray or a pest spray, disease spray, you always want to do it in the morning when the plants are dewy. And that's going to allow that substance to stay on the plant as long as possible. If you spray in the middle of the day, it's going to evaporate really fast or break down in the sunlight really fast. So you always want to do it when plants are moist with dew. But Japanese beetles, they're hard to manage for sure. I don't have this in the slide, but one thing, the University of Missouri did a trial on, and they said it was effective. And what they did was they took like plastic trash can barrels, like a big plastic trash can with a strong lid that goes on it. They cut a hole in it, and have you all ever seen those Japanese beetle traps that are like a bag with this little it's usually like yellow and it's got this little entrance thing? So they took the entrance thing and they cut a hole in the top of the trash can. They put the entrance thing in that hole, and then they put Japanese beetle lure inside the trash can. And they said that they were just flying in that trash can and they can't get out through that little entrance thing. And so they put, like, let's say this was your field, they put one in each corner of the field, and they called it like a force field. And they said that it really helped the Japanese beetles. So you could look that up. The University of Missouri did that. So white druplet disorder is typically caused by stink bug feeding. Okay, that's what that lovely look there is. So it's still edible, but it negatively impacts their appearance. So that's something that's an issue with blackberries also. So one thing to help is to aim to harvest the fruit around dawn, so it has less field heat, it stores better, and also the insect activity is minimized at that time. So insects get more sluggish at night when it cools off, and it's best to harvest berries in the dawn hours if possible. And like I mentioned earlier, late season cultivars such as Vaughn, they may have issues with these SWD fruit flies, so earlier varieties will not. Marketing with blackberries is pretty easy. They're fairly easy sell. You can pack them in half pint if they fit. Some berries are so big they won't fit in a half pint. Or pint clamshells. Maybe sell bags of frozen berries. They're not as popular in the market as other berries, but there's decent demand. And they're a great choice for U-pick operations. They have a long season. They're easy to pick. That would be a great choice. They make excellent jam, juice, pies, smoothies, ice cream, and wine. You can sell them to a processor or restaurant. The leaves are medicinal, and they make really tasty tea, actually. It tastes just like black tea. And I estimate one productive plant can produce about $50 to $100 in marketable fruit under optimal conditions, maybe more. So to summarize, blackberries are easy to grow. They require some easy pruning and pest control management. They have to be trellised, and they take up a decent amount of space. Newer varieties have upped the bar for quality, flavor, and production. And they have versatile growing habits, okay, like erect or semi-erect, trailing. And they have a versatile ripening season, so allow some flexibility in a very long planting window, like if you did early, mid, and late varieties. Not quite as popular as others, but there's decent demand. A great choice for U-pick and value-added goods. Red raspberries. Okay, so if blackberries are the king of berries, red raspberries are definitely the queen. They're easy to grow, extremely cold hardy, excellent for beginner growers, and they'll actually produce fruit within 6 months to a year from planting. So they're probably they're one of the fastest growing, fastest producing small fruits. And they really suffer a few serious problems, but they do have some challenges. The canes are erect, slightly prickly. They do require trellising. The fruit ripens from mid-June to October. They have excellent fresh market potential, and they readily sell at any market. And demand is high, and competition's practically zero. Excellent you-pick fruit, excellent value-added goods, wine, etc. The medicinal leaves, they're anti-menstrual cramp and pro-lactation, so they're very amazing feminine herb. There's two main types of raspberries, June-bearing and ever-bearing. I think the autocorrect made that overbearing. It's supposed to be ever-bearing. Good old autocorrect. So it's likely best for marketing purposes to go with June-bearing raspberries. Okay, June bearers. They tend to get higher yields, bigger berries, and the picking window is shorter, around 3 to 4 weeks. Ever-bearing types might be best for backyard growers, and you-pick where longer seasons preferred. Red raspberries need a sunny location on very well-draining soil. Soil that's prone to getting waterlogged during storms or that floods and holds water will not work. They have to have excellent soil drainage because they're very prone to root rots on wet soils and will rapidly die off. So the first raspberries ever planted was probably close to 20 years ago, and they died off within 6 months because I put them somewhere where it holds water after heavy storms. Red raspberries can tolerate some light shade, but they need at least half a day of full sun, direct sun. You can raise the soil slightly, like when you're growing, such as if you're growing potatoes or sweet potatoes, and that can help facilitate good drainage and healthier plants. So even if the soil is just raised up, maybe 6 inches, 12 inches above surrounding soil, that can really help them a whole lot. Okay, this is a professional operation here. So they require a lightweight trellis to hold the canes. So the canes aren't very heavy, and they don't require massive trellis. You can even just throw together a trellis out of some T-post and some metal wire, or even like tomato twine works. You notice here that these have these heavy-duty posts, but they're not even anchored because the canes are so light. They don't have to anchor those posts. Okay, so the plants require some light pruning and thinning of the canes. Okay, so they make a ton of canes, and you have to thin them out if you want the best production, the healthiest vines. So if you don't thin them out, it leads to small berries, a jungle of canes, and this also reduces airflow, sunlight penetration, and on late ripening cultivars can lead to spotted winged Drosophila SWD infestation, because spotted winged Drosophila, it has to have a shady location, because if the fruit flies are in the full sun, they'll dry out and die. So they have to be in the shade. So the more sunlight penetration you have in your fruit plantings, the less you're going to have issues with spotted winged Drosophila. The plants are shallow rooted, okay, so they're susceptible to drought. So like I was mentioning earlier, Kentucky tends towards late season drought conditions starting in August. And so for this reason, a thick mulch of straw is excellent to help hold in moisture, as is high soil organic matter. Thank you, sir. So a drip irrigation setup or drip tape is highly advised. The berries need careful harvest. Okay, they crush easily, and they also mold in refrigeration within 5 to 6 days of picking. So you want to harvest them in the morning and harvest them maybe every other day or so, and just put them in the fridge and then take them to market. If you can make it to market twice a week or however you're selling them, that's optimal with raspberries. But I used to sell red raspberries when I used to do farmers markets. I had a CSA operation and vegetables, and I started raising red raspberries, and I just couldn't bring enough of them. I was selling about $200 a week in red raspberries off of a planting that would fit in half of this room. So it was really great. And I was selling them to a health food store. I was selling them at the farmer's market. Very popular. $5 for a half pint, and that was almost 10 years ago. So these are some cultivars for Kentucky. Heritage, that's more of a backyard variety, but produces nice fruit. Caroline is a little more disease resistant and tastier than Heritage. June Bears, Prelude, it's a new variety. It seems really solid. And then Liberty and Titan are two that are recommended by UK as varieties that do really well in Kentucky. As far as pests and diseases, Phytophthora root rot is the main issue. That's what I was mentioning earlier with the drainage issues. So you want to choose naturally resistant varieties like Caroline, which I mentioned here. Caroline is a little bit more resistant to root rot. You want to plant in healthy soil with high soil organic matter and excellent water drainage, slightly raised beds again, and make sure not to irrigate when the soil is moist. So be careful about that. And then there's also this disease called anthracnose that affects a number of brambles. That can be an issue. It's never been a serious issue as far as I've seen, but you want to thin the canes well, remove diseased canes, etc. And these are those little spotted-winged Drosophila flies I was talking about. You see the little spots on the end of their wings. That's why they're called spotted wing. And again, fall ripening berries are going to be susceptible to those. And you also, another thing about hygiene, like I was talking about, you want to avoid having fruit rotting in any of your plantings. So no matter what kind of fruit you're growing, whether it's a fruit tree, a berry, a fig, anything, you want to avoid rotten fruit, because if you just let it get all messy and you've got fruit rotting on the ground and fruit rotting on the plants, it's going to attract a lot of fruit flies and funguses and things that can be detrimental. So you want to try to avoid that. So what I typically do is when I'm harvesting fruit, I'll also harvest the rotted fruit and just put it into a separate container, separate bucket or something, and then you can just bury it. Like I just dig a little hole and just throw it in the ground and bury it. And stink bugs, like this invasive marmorated stink bug, which probably all of you all have seen. They're in my house right now. They're probably in yours too. They overwinter. So they can damage the fruit, but it seems pretty minor. Doesn't seem to be a real big issue with red raspberries. So yeah, half pint clamshell can go for $5 to $8. Local food and health food stores that might be interested. Plenty of value-added goods potential: wines, desserts, jams, dried fruit leather, medicinal leaves. So you also think when you're thinning out all those canes, you're going to have a pile of canes and leaves. Maybe there's a local herbalist that might want those leaves, or some way you can market those. I'm not a big drinker, but the best wine I've ever had in my life was red raspberry wine. So it makes really good wine. And yeah, I think they're one of the most underutilized small fruit plants in Kentucky, because you bring red raspberries to the farmer's market and people will get excited. And they're easy to grow, they're very productive, they're just very well suited. So basically, to summarize, they're easy to grow with some minor pruning and some easy thinning work. They must be trellised. Irrigation's highly advised for those. And you got a long ripening season. June bears are probably the best for Kentucky market growers. Yeah, like I said, underutilized, very popular. Great choice for U-pick. And they could fit in well with other typical market grower crops, as the labor and space requirement is low and the value is very high. So we're going to talk about one more fruit here, and then we're going to take a 5-minute break. Okay, so black raspberries. Is there anybody in here that's never heard of black raspberries? Everybody's heard of them? So they're a lot more unusual. You're not going to see these typically for sale. Okay, they're easy to grow, and they're very cold hardy. They're excellent for beginner growers, and one of the first fruits I ever grew. They produce fruit 1 year from planting. Through breeding, the fruits become larger, fleshier, more abundant. The plant makes small, prickly thorns. There's wild native vines everywhere around Kentucky with good fruit quality, actually, but the berries tend to be a little small. And they suffer almost zero serious problems here. The canes are blue to purple, which can be quite stunning. The small reticulated thorns are mostly harmless. Tahi is a brand new thornless type. I don't know if it'll grow well in Kentucky, but it is thornless apparently. The growth habit's nearly identical to blackberries and not red raspberry. So you're gonna grow and prune these just like blackberries. But similar to red raspberry, they produce a hollow thimble-like fruit. So blackberries have a soft core and are not hollow, although sometimes people confuse black raspberries for blackberries. The fruiting season's brief, about 2 to 3 weeks in June. The fruit's soft and highly perishable. It's amazing when processed, has incredible flavor and color, and very high in antioxidants. So actually, that reminds me, I've got some for you all to try here. Okay, so this is how this is going to work. The little popsicle sticks are for sampling, okay? No double dipping. You get one try. And there's 4 types of jams, and you have 4 spoons. So this is homemade. I made all these jams myself from homegrown fruit. There's no sugar. It's just uncooked raw honey and cooked fruit. That's all it is. Maybe there's a tiny bit of stevia in the black raspberry, but that's it. So pass that around, give that a taste. And I think it's amazing. It makes great, anything you cook with black raspberries are amazing. Uh-huh. Wait. What was that again? Chocolate cake. Cream cheese icing. Black raspberry jam. Great. Sounds amazing. Okay. So anything you produce with them is great. And the fruit is a bit seedy, so some people don't like that. The fruit's a bit seedy. It's really easy to grow. Doesn't require trellising. The canes are semi-erect and fruit on 1-year-old flora canes, similar to blueberry or blackberry. They naturally tip layer. Okay, so what that means is when the canes grow, they grow like an arch, and then they hit the ground. And wherever they hit the ground, they're going to grow roots. And so they spread in this way. The blooms are frost resistant, blooming in May. And once again, same as pretty much everything else, high soil organic matter, well-draining soil, full sun, no frost pocket. Be careful of perennial weeds like pokeberry and weed trees getting established in black raspberries. So I utilize sheets of cardboard around them for that reason. And the plants tip layer. I once saw a commercial operation in northern Ohio growing black raspberries. They pruned the prima canes back to about 3 to 4 feet tall. So they were only about this tall or so. And next year they flowered and fruited at an easy height for harvesting. So they kept them really short. And like other raspberries, it readily comes off the stem when ripe. The fruit will get overripe if left on the vine and rot. The soft fruit should only be stacked about 3 to 4 berries high in a clamshell and refrigerated rapidly. Okay, so there's a new variety called Niwot, and it's a prima cane fruiter, meaning you get 2 crops per year. So you get a crop on the flora canes, like always, but then you get a crop on the prima canes also. So that's amazing. The first crop comes out in June as usual. Then you get the second crop ripening from August all the way to November. Like I was out in the middle of November picking black raspberries. So this makes Niwot about 3 to 4 times as productive as other varieties. You get months of production as opposed to 2 to 3 weeks. Okay, so the Niwot's very vigorous. It grows about 6 to 7 feet tall. No trellis is needed, but like those round ring tomato cages work really well. And I would say that the flavor's not quite as good on Niwot as some of the other ones. Like if the other ones are 10, Niwot's like a 7 or 8, but it's still really good and it produces like way more fruit than any other variety. So Niwot is an amazing variety, and it's pretty much the only one I'd recommend planting for commercial purposes. It's about average to other cultivated varieties. So I know that doesn't mean much, but you're close to like nickel size or something like that. Black raspberries aren't very big fruit. They're kind of small. So these are some varieties for Kentucky. Niwot, like I said, other good varieties are Bristol and Jewel. Everybody get the jam? Working on it. All right. So marketing. It might be better in urban areas because, in my experience, people in urban areas are a little bit more adventurous with what they might try. You might give free tastings. You know, anybody that tastes fresh black raspberries is going to be pretty sold on them. Half pint clamshell could go for 5 to 8. The soft berries require a half pint clamshell. Maybe a pint clamshell would also work, but you just have to make sure they're not getting crushed, right? And local food stores and health food stores might be interested. Value added good potential, wines, desserts, jams, dried fruit leather, and a small commercial market exists in Ohio, likely elsewhere. And they're delicious and nutritious native fruit worth looking into. Very easy to grow with a habit very similar to blackberry. Not as productive or marketable as the reds. Prima-cane black raspberries are much more productive, and they're an excellent processing and backyard fruit. So who just tried black raspberry for the first time? Thumbs up? Nice. All right, so we're going to take a very short 5-minute break. All right, we're going to get back started here. So, you all learning some stuff? All right, we got a lot to go into still. All right, gooseberries. Who here doesn't know anything about gooseberries? I was in the same boat 10 years ago, and somebody gave me a gooseberry plant. I was just like, okay, I don't really know what this is, but I'll plant it. Now these are one of my favorite small fruits. Okay, they are easy to grow and extremely cold hardy. They're named after the goose foot-shaped leaves. Okay, not a very good name, but this is what we're working with. So they're native to Europe, and they're extremely popular there. Should be better known here, and most of our European ancestors loved this fruit. It suffers few problems here in Kentucky. There is also a native species in Missouri. Makes a small green fruit. The berries ripen around July. The flavor's tart to fairly sweet. Speaking of which, we got some gooseberry jam here. Look at that beautiful color that gets passed to you. I'm just going to start loosening those lids for you. Okay, so I one time someone compared it to apple butter in texture, and it's got a really intense flavor. I think you'll like it. The flavor profile resembles kiwi, apricot, plum with some tropical notes. Overripe fruit gets mushy and bland, so you want to harvest it at the proper time. The plant produces some thorns. It's always been fast and easy to harvest for me personally, but you may want to wear gloves. Famous for making jams. Due to its origins in Northern Europe, it may be best in locations in Kentucky that don't get full sun, okay? So my bushes earn about half-day full sun, and they thrive. Deer and most animals seem to have zero interest in this plant. Birds can eat the fruit when it's dead ripe. KSU did research and successful trials on gooseberries years ago, and that's a link to their document, so get a quick photo of that. So they did grow them here on site, and they found that they did very well. Okay, they're easy. So small starts will produce fruit in about 2 to 3 years. Yields about 1 to 2 pounds of berries or more per bush. And as mentioned before, half-day sun is likely ideal. Well-draining soil, no frost pockets. Pruning should be done annually and is similar to pruning blueberries or currants. Okay, so these are growing in my front yard. That's my house. So they're nice for edible landscaping, which you can do with all these small fruits, make really good edible landscaping. Japanese beetles feed on the foliage after harvest. They don't seem to be a big deal. Diseases can include powdery mildew if they're planted somewhere that's too shady or there's not good airflow. High soil organic matter. Irrigation doesn't seem necessary. The plants will look defoliated and a little scrappy by late summer, but that's normal. They're pollinated by bumblebees. They bloom early, okay, but they don't seem like late frosts have any impact on them. So very, very resilient. These are some cultivars for Kentucky. Hinnomaki red, that's what's pictured right there. They come in all different colors, so they can be green, red, yellow, pink. Fresh gooseberries in Kentucky, they're going to be a hard sell, unfortunately. Just like 2/3 of the room raised your hand, you never even heard of these before, so imagine taking them to the market. But you can educate customers. You can give out free samples of ripe, crisp, non-mushy fruit. This will increase your conversions. At $5 per half pint, I'd estimate one bush could bring in about $30 to $50. The fruit makes delicious kiwi-flavored jam. Wine, maybe. Gooseberry is very high in vitamin C, has quite a tang to it. What do you all think about that jam? You think it's pretty good? If you have ethnic populations from places like Poland, Germany, Russia, Ukraine, they'd be an easy sell. I would target those populations. Might also be interested in a U-pick. Lexington, Kentucky has over 1,000 Ukrainian immigrants currently, and I'm sure Louisville does too, probably even more. They're delicious, productive, and easy to grow. Like I said earlier, frost and freeze-resistant blooms. They're very reliable. They produce fruit every single year. I've had them in the ground since they started. And again, little fresh marketing value, but certain populations would have a strong interest. Has good value added, good potential, and it's a great backyard fruit. Kids like the tangy, crunchy fruit. Somebody one time compared them to Sour Patch candy. I've never had that, but apparently it tastes like gooseberries. All right, we're going to go into rapid succession of small fruits here, so hang in there. So hardy passion fruit. Has anybody never heard of these? Never heard of these? Okay, so they're easy to grow. They're very cold, hardy, perennial root system. So the vine dies back in the winter, but the roots are perennial. They produce fruit usually the same season of planting. And there's no name varieties available, but I'm working on it. And I've got a clone that I'm going to be releasing probably this year, maybe next year. The plant's vigorous, perennial vine, so it needs a trellis or something to climb on. Wild native vines abound, so you can find these all over the place. I've noticed railroad tracks and fence lines seem to be favorite haunting places of them. Uh-huh.
Is this something like if I got one from a friend, is there going to be an issue with bringing diseases like you're talking about?
Not if you're just planting the seeds. So like,
But like if I took a cutting?
they won't grow from cuttings. You could dig up a plant maybe. Yeah. No, I mean they're native, and you can't buy any name cultivars anyway. So it's just the fruit quality might be so-so. That's kind of the biggest concern, because most wild vines that I've tried personally are pretty mediocre in flavor, but I have some that are delicious, and they suffer zero serious problems here in Kentucky. They're native to nearly the entire eastern USA. Okay, so the inner pulp is full of crunchy edible seeds, which some people like, some people don't like. The pulp has a sweet, tangy, tropical flavor. Thank you. Reminiscent of banana, citrus, and it's highly fragrant. I mean, these things are just like perfumed. One vine produces about 15 to 20 fruits per season. That's been my observation. Fruit ripens from mid-August to November. So some specimens seem to ripen quite late, October to November, whereas others seem to ripen a little earlier, around September. But they're kind of an autumn fruit, not affected by spotted winged Drosophila. So after several freezes have occurred, the vines die, but the perennial roots survive and will vigorously sprout new vines in May. They're also called maypop and lots of other folk names. The leaves are used as a relaxant and sedative in herbal medicine. They're pollinated by bumblebees. So this is a great reason why not to kill carpenter bees on your farm, because they're great pollinators of a lot of small fruits. Pretty much everything we've gone through is pollinated by bumblebees and occasionally honeybees. How aggressive? They're very aggressive. And they sucker profusely. So you don't want to put them like in your vegetable garden or next to your blackberry trellis or something like that, because they will sucker from underground and start popping up. So they're very aggressive, which can be a pro or con depending on your management style. The exotic, beautiful flowers reminded Spanish missionaries of the story of Jesus' crucifixion. Thus, the passion in the name refers to the compassion of Christ. The plant blooms from August to October, and the fruit takes about 25 to 30 days to develop and ripen. And the best are about the size of a large chicken egg, similar to commercial tropical passion fruit. They're grown by direct seeding or by transplanting dormant roots or plants. Although it can trail across the ground, for best production and cleaner fruit, it needs a trellis. And large tomato cages work well for that, like those ring-type cages work just fine. The plants will readily climb anything, and they do sucker profusely. The only pest I have noticed in the fields is a symbiotic caterpillar species that feeds on the foliage. Damage is very minimal. Some people claim otherwise. They're easy to see and pick off. You might leave some to support the native population. If the fruit's allowed to lay on the ground, it can get blemished. Mollusk and flea beetles can be problematic, and disease pest pressure is very low. The fruit drops from the vine when it's ripe. If it's not dropped, it's not ripe. So picking the fruit will guarantee you're harvesting underripe fruit with little to no flavor. Let it drop. Refrigerated fruit holds well for several weeks, maybe up to a month. That's one of the special cultivars I'm working on right now. So it's a native fruit. It's been completely untapped for commercial population. It's not likely the next pawpaw, but still could become a sensation. And poor genetics will produce very small fruit and bland fruit. I developed a superior strain from a planting I came across in Lexington that produces large, tastier fruit, far better than average. Seedlings from these seem to reliably carry on the good traits, and I have one seedling I'm planning on cloning and releasing soon. To market this unusual fruit, you'll have to engage in some educational hustle work. Free samples or free smells would increase conversions. Some people may like the crunchy seeds, others maybe not. Value-added potential as a juice or dessert ingredient, simply used in place of tropical passion fruit in passion fruit recipes found online. The pulp freezes well. I'd put 4 to 5 fruits in bags or wooden quarts. I charge at least $1, $1.50 per fruit, so around $5 to $6 a quart. In a large popular market, maybe you could even ask more, 7 to 10. So to summarize, they're a delicious and versatile native fruit worth looking into. Very easy to grow, need a little bit of trellis and some space. Has commercial potential if good genetics are utilized, because they got to taste good or no one's going to be interested. And good processing in backyard fruit. Next, we're going to look at one of my favorite small fruits, and that's mulberry. You got some mulberry jam here. Okay, so they're related to figs and also tropical fruits, jackfruit and breadfruit, distantly related to cannabis, produce separate male-female trees. They were once used to feed hogs and chickens in the South via dropped berries. The leaves are highly nutritious also. There are at least 6 mulberry species found in Kentucky that I've identified. This can get a little confusing, so we're going to make this real easy. Okay, that's a specimen growing in Danville, Kentucky. All right, Morris alba, or white mulberry, Asian mulberry used for silkworm production in China, India, etc. Most mulberries in Kentucky and nearly all mulberries found in urban locations are alba. So although it's called white mulberry, the fruit isn't necessarily always white. It varies widely in growth habit, either apple tree size or enormous like this one. Depending on the genetics, alba fruit can be pure white, lavender, pink, or dark purple to black. The fruit quality varies a whole lot. Lighter colored fruit tends to be sweeter and less tart. The tartness, though, adds a lot of depth of flavor. Most trees available in nurseries are Morris alba. Some people like the sweet white fruit because it's non-staining. White berries dry nicely and are quite popular in the Middle East. Morris alba is completely cold hardy in Kentucky, and it generally thrives. Next, we have Morris rubra, or red mulberry. This is our native mulberry found on the sunny edges of forests and farms. It produces large heart-shaped leaves. Can be commonly found in Kentucky outside of urban locations. Rubra fruit tends to be long with good flavor, reminiscent of cherry. It readily hybridizes with Morris alba, which has raised concern about the future of red mulberry as a distinct species. Many trees found in Kentucky are likely a cross between the two. So this might lead you to say, well, if I plant Morris alba trees, am I hurting the future of Morris rubra? Well, not really, because the trees that you plant, like from my nursery, they're Morris alba, they're female trees that don't produce pollen or viable seed. So they're just going to produce fruit, but not viable seed, because they're not pollinated, unless you happen to have a male pollinator nearby. The hybrids between the two are often desirable for fruit production because red mulberries produce long, 1 inch or longer fruit with good flavor. Crossing them with alba can increase production and flavor profile. The very popular cultivar Illinois everbearing is thought to be a rubra alba hybrid. Okay, so there's a comparison between Illinois everbearing mulberries and your typical wild mulberry that's going to be something like that. So huge difference. Finally, there's Morris nigra, or black mulberry. Okay, this European species apparently always produces berries that are black. It's famous for having outstanding flavor, but it's not cold hardy. I don't think it'll really survive long term in Kentucky. Okay, so there's a few more species, but we're not going to talk about them right now. So always check the species when you're looking to produce mulberry trees. Okay, you want Morris alba. So nurseries tend to butcher these distinctions and make it confusing, so be careful. And you also want to avoid early budding types like the variety Pakistan. Those are not going to survive here. So Morris alba is the common mulberry, and most varieties in the nursery trade are the species. Morris rubra is the native. They can cross, and Morris nigra is not likely to grow in Kentucky successfully. So mulberries are very easy to grow. They need full sun and well-draining soil. Avoid frost pockets. They're very drought resistant once established, but they may need water the first season, especially if it gets really hot and dry in August or September. That's a Illinois everbearing there. White mulberries are deer bait. Okay, so they really like the foliage. They really like the foliage. So you need to cage them. Production starts in 1 year from planting. They have extremely fast growth, can put on 6 feet or more growth per year. Fruit quality increases as the tree ages and also with soil health. So poor quality soil will produce smaller and more sour berries. Could they be trained to bush forms and grow like this long term? I convinced EKU to trial this, so they're doing that right now. This is somewhere in Asia. I found this picture online, but these are mulberries trained to bush form, which is really interesting and I think has some potential. Popcorn disease is a serious fungal disease. Okay, so I saw a bunch of this in Stanford, where I'm from, on a wild mulberry tree. Illinois everbearing, I've seen it hit a tiny bit, and I recommend resistant varieties, especially further south. Stink bugs feed on mulberry fruit. Birds can be problematic. However, the production's so heavy, it's usually not a huge deal. Some varieties are prone to alternaria. That's what you see here. And I don't really know if it affects production, but overall, mulberries seem to do great every year. The fruit is so delicious that free samples would likely increase conversions. Will entail some hustle work and education, And the berries they have a very high water content, so they mold rapidly. Half-pint clamshells for the soft berries, lots of value-added good potential. Trees can also be used for feeding livestock, both the berries and leaves. Easy to grow, very delicious, native and European Asian types do well here. They have some production challenges, such as the tree form, harvesting, rapid molding of the fruit, the unusual fruit. Comes in many colors and sizes, but it has a lot of potential and is potentially really good for livestock. That's a variety I imported from Turkey that I named and released in the nursery last year. Strawberries. Okay, we're getting a little bit more mainstream here now. What'd you all think of mulberry jam? Pretty good? Good? I like it. Okay, so they're related to apples and pears again. Rosaceae, native to the eastern U.S. Modern strawberries are a hybrid between several species originating in North and South America. They're obviously extremely common and well-known fruit. Customers just line up for strawberries. They're the earliest fresh fruit available next to honeyberries. Production can start rapidly depending on how you go about it. So we're going to look at that in a moment. They have some pros and cons. Generally, they do great. The little green cap on the top has more nutrition than the berry itself. And much more fun fact, the berry has romantic and aphrodisiac connotations. Okay, chocolate dipped, anybody? Add a little romance to your life. Modern breeding is focused on enormous berries with strange shapes and little true flavor. Like, what the heck is that? Your locally grown, more traditional strawberries can have an advantage in flavor and quality. A few things to consider. Organic berries are generally smaller, yet much tastier, softer, and more luscious. Weed pressure can get heavy on these little ground-hugging plants, so plant accordingly. Harvesting involves bending over or squatting for extended periods. There are two main growing systems, annual production and matted row. In annual production, the plants are treated as annuals, okay? So you're starting with bare root plants. You're planting them in late winter, early spring. They're allowed to immediately fruit. After harvest, you get rid of them. The entire process takes about 2 to 3 months. So the pros are if your beds are reasonably clean of weed seeds and the weed pressure is very low, as soon as weeds get established, the bed is being converted to something else. So basically, a couple months, if it starts to get weedy, you're going to tarp it off and get rid of it, and then you can put in something else, summer vegetables, cover crop, etc. The cons are the yield and quality are lower, but not bad. But for what you save in maintenance work, this is probably the best option. Second option is matted row, and that's a traditional option involving planting in spring, removing all the blossoms and thus preventing fruiting, allowing suckers to fill out the bed, and harvest is 1 year later, the following spring. The pros are that you get bigger yields of better berries. The row will produce for about 3 years, thus no need to replant every spring. The thinned out suckers can be potted and sold, creating income. Cons are that the weed pressure can be difficult to keep under control, especially on large plantings. Removing the blooms the first season is labor intensive. Okay, you could use small bladed snips to do that. Labor requirement is increased substantially, yet so are yields over time. So one option with the matted row system is planting on black plastic, like on this corporate production field here. The pros are that there's almost no weeds and berries are up off the ground, reducing rot. The cons are the environmental impact of all that plastic. Maybe there's biodegradable options. So starting a planting, you must start with certified disease-free bare root plants, okay? So no freebies if you're wanting to grow them seriously. You cut off 1/3 of the root system. Plant on raised beds. And strawberries prefer slightly acidic soil, so avoid planting on alkaline soil or sites that were recently limed. Acidic mulch like pine needles or oak leaves work really well. Thick mulch of straw reduces weeds and help keep berries off the ground where they rot. So for the very best berries, you can thin out tiny blossoms or tiny undersized developing berries. When plants are in bloom, keep the row cover handy. Okay, so late frosts and freezes will damage the frost-sensitive blooms. So flowers that get damaged by frost, they have these black centers where the ovaries have been destroyed. Viable flowers have yellow centers like the one on the left. So if there's going to be frost the next day or that evening or that night, cover them with row cover. For marketing, only utilize June-bearing strawberries, and there's early, mid, and late season producers. You may also consider white-fruited pine berries. They have a bit of a pineapple flavor. I'm currently experimenting with them, so I don't have much to say on them right now. I don't know if they really do that well here, but there's something to look into. Could be a good niche crop. Indoor hydroponic options are available. The upfront capital with this would be very high, so making this profitable will be challenging, but it's working out for some people out there. Some of the pests and diseases are tarnished plant bug, which makes the berries deformed like this. That's called cat facing. Spraying cannot be done when the plants are blooming. Other pests, pill bugs, mollusk, birds sometimes get interested. You can net them easily. It's another benefit of strawberries, easy to net. Gray mold is probably the biggest issue most people face. If left unchecked in a wet spring, it could decimate the crop. And you'll want to spray antifungals in wet spring to save the crop. And also harvest those moldy berries. And then I'd recommend burying them to keep the spores from flying around. One thing that's helpful is to remove excess plants. So the plants always need to be about 1 foot apart. You don't want the bed just covered in plants. They got to be about 1 foot apart so you get good airflow. Deer do enjoy feeding on the foliage. So marketing is easy because, like I said, people line up for them. They're eager for fresh fruit after a cold Kentucky winter. 2-quart baskets are very popular. People line up. Price should be high if the berries look great and there's not much competition, which there usually is with strawberries. You could get 15 to 20 bucks per basket like that. Smaller pint pulp containers or wooden containers should also be offered. Give people options. Don't sell them too cheap. And maybe give some free samples of your superior organic berries. It's hard to imagine marketing them anyway other than fresh fruit. U-picks, undersized berries, maybe to a local bakery or ice cream or something. And they're relatively easy to grow. So you'll have some competition at the market, but they'll sell themselves. And they're highly in demand. Profitability is not very high according to market growers for the space utilized compared to other market growing crops. All right, we're going to get into figs here. How many people are interested in growing figs? A lot of people. Okay, so figs are unrelated to most other fruits. Okay, they're related to banyan trees. They're native to India, the Middle East, and warmer regions of Eurasia. Since time immemorial, figs have been traded via cuttings and have grown wherever winters allowed for cultivation. Originally subtropical or tropical in origin, figs have been adapted and selected by people to handle colder winters. Many species exist to produce edible fruit. Ficus carica is a species we're discussing. These are also called the common fig. Figs are not cold hardy enough to produce perennial trunks and branches in Kentucky outdoors. So whatever growth they produce above ground, most of that's going to get killed off by Kentucky's winters. So typically the tops are going to completely die or almost completely die back to the ground every winter. Occasionally a mild winter will allow the trunk to survive, but next winter will certainly take it back to the ground again. Thousands of varieties exist, and I personally trialed around 25 or so of the most promising and cold hardy and continue to experiment with more. Early producing varieties ripen in Kentucky starting in August and ending when freezing weather forces dormancy in late October to November. I only recommend growing figs indoors in unheated high tunnels in Kentucky unless you're just wanting to grow them in your backyard for fun. Outdoors, you basically get a big, very beautiful ornamental bush that might produce a few figs very late in the season. High tunnel production has potential in Kentucky as a niche crop, so we're going to explore this. Many people in Kentucky have never had fresh figs. Most immediately think of Fig Newton cookies, which they attach to either positive or negative feelings. Most feel neutral or strangely inimical about figs. I've had people turn their noses up like, ugh, figs. And it's like, have you ever had one? No. The flesh is silky smooth, melts in your mouth, and the flavor is very sweet and berry-like, or sometimes just very sweet. I mean, they are delicious. Figs have legendary worldwide status and find mention in every major religious text in the world through being amazing, not some mediocre, uninteresting plant. Figs are legend, the fruits of paradise. They have no viable seeds, as Kentucky figs do not require pollination, nor is natural pollination possible here. Tiny edible seeds create a nice crunch. They're actually extremely easy to grow. However, Kentucky conditions are not favorable for fruit production, so you got to put in some effort to grow this fruit. We're going to find out what that is. A high tunnel is necessary for substantial production and survival. They require some specific management. So simply letting the plants grow wild and unmanaged, even in a high tunnel, will lessen fruit production considerably. So I found the best means of production to be the Japanese espalier system. Basically, the plant is trained to a central stem that branches in opposite directions. These branches, called laterals, are trained very low to the ground, basically 5 to 6 inches. Fruiting branches grow on these laterals. In winter, the fruiting branches are pruned off. The remaining plant is heavily insulated for winter. Some supplemental heating may help in extreme weather. So I use a barrel stove when temps go close to 0, and which I was just heating my fig tunnel for about 3 nights last week. I was heating it with wood. So I have a YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube and type in Peaceful Heritage Nursery, you'll find my YouTube channel where I have a lot of videos on growing fruits and berries, mulberries and figs. I have a video here, but we don't have time to watch it. So you can find this on YouTube. If you want to watch the video, it's called Japanese Fig Training, and it tells you exactly how to do this fig training system, and everything you need to know is in that video. So if that's really of interest to you, go to YouTube, type in Peaceful Heritage Nursery, and you'll find the Japanese fig training video. They do quite well in containers. The catch is that they can't stay outside during the winter, so they have to be brought in somewhere where they can stay dormant. So what I do is I have these insulated storage buildings, and I store them after they've gotten frosted on and lost their leaves. I put them in the storage building, and they store really nicely in there. But they can definitely be grown in containers. You don't get a whole lot of fruit production, but you'll get a few handfuls of fruit, and it's fun. They're really beautiful too. So variety selection is very crucial with figs because the cold hardiness varies widely, humidity and rain adaptation, disease and insect pressure, which has to do with the eye. Okay, so this is the eye of the fig. It's a little opening on the bottom of the fruit. And you want early season production, so that's the eye right there. So if the eye is open, that makes the fig prone to insect and diseases. Those eyes are fairly closed. Chicago Hardy is basically the very best one. Floria is also good. It's very early and produces large figs. The quality's good. They're not as tasty as Chicago Hardy, but they're good. These are some other varieties that have done really well for us. Black Bethlehem, Malta Black, and any Mount Etna type generally does well in Kentucky. Those are some of the most cold hardy figs around. So some very warm urban microclimates afford some protection. Like this is on the side of the house where I grew up. I planted this in Louisville, Kentucky. I planted this fig almost 20 years ago, and it survives pretty well, but it still dies back most years. They're very, very drought resistant once established. I irrigate very little, but I may not even really need to. They do well in all types of soil, but they like soil with lime added. They don't like acidic soil. They have very few pests, but there's a few worth mentioning. Ants. So apparently putting cinnamon around the base of the trees helps dissuade ants, and also tanglefoot bands. Tanglefoot is this very sticky, super sticky substance sold for organic agriculture. Spotted-winged Drosophila again. Possums apparently really like figs, so I always trap a few possums in my fig tunnel. They like them. African fig flies, I've never encountered these, but apparently they're becoming an issue out on the West Coast, so you never want to buy figs in pots from California. Buy them from me. Asian ambrosia beetles, you can paint pruning wounds and maintain healthy trees and excellent hygiene. Otherwise, ambrosia beetles can be an issue if the trees get stressed out. Fig bud mites, that's what all those little spots are. You want to be very careful where you source plants and cuttings from, and these can be devastating and difficult to eradicate. And also fig mosaic virus causes this intense deformation of the leaves and splotching. So it's actually present in most fig varieties. Some are just more prone to showing symptoms. So I destroy any that show symptoms, and that can spread via mites and aphids. And you can also get virus-free tissue cultured figs of a few varieties. And there's also a disease called fig rust. It's like a foliage fungus, and that can be from non-adapted varieties, poor air circulation, etc. Deer, don't touch them. Raccoons, I'm not sure about. I suspected raccoons were getting the fruit, and then I kept catching possums, so I'm thinking I don't think they're that interested. And you want to be careful of the fig latex. When you're pruning figs, they'll drip out this white latex that is very phytotoxic and will burn your hands. So, wear gloves. So, pint clamshells or pint containers, half pints maybe. The fruit is soft and bruises easily. You might even want to wear gloves when you're picking it because of that. So you want to harvest the fruit when it's soft and colored, but just shy of being completely ripe. So it has cracks on it. It's dead ripe. It's going to have the best flavor, but it's not going to make it to market well. So you want to pick it just prior to that. So these are ones that are starting to get droopy and soft. Those are like perfect for picking. They hold in refrigeration pretty well, about 6 to 10 days. You can harvest them about 3 to 4 times per week, holding in cold storage. I'm friends with a grower in southern Indiana, Michael Hicks, and he successfully markets figs to his customers in Bloomington, Indiana. He's growing them in a high tunnel like this. I could sell them easily, but I eat them all, and I share with anyone that makes it into my fig tunnel. And that could change as the tunnel's only about at 30% production right now because I've gotten rid of a bunch of varieties and replaced them with new ones. Ethnic populations would get highly interested in fresh figs. Middle Eastern people, Indians, Italians, Greeks. Urban markets are probably going to do better in Kentucky because most people in Kentucky have not had fresh figs. Now, if you went further south, that would be a different story. The ripe fig color varies a lot. They can be yellow, green, pink, purple, black. In general, the dark figs are the best selling. In my high tunnel, I harvest about a ½ pound per day of Chicago Hardy for about 3 weeks, and lesser amounts for about 5 to 6 weeks. So I get about 8 or 9 weeks of production, and I likely get about 15 to 20 pounds per plant per season. So if one pint weighs 12 ounces and sold for $10, and that's about $13.50 per pound, at 15 pounds per plant, $15 a pound, you get about $2.25 per plant. A 50-foot high tunnel with 12 figs, you can get about $2,700 a year if you were doing this right. So I think that's pretty good. That's comparable to tomatoes. Uh-huh. I think it's closer to 8. Yeah, because there's 2 rows. Yeah, 2 rows.
How tall, if you're doing that to where you just got the tube kind of going off the side there, what kind of height are you?
Well, the high tunnel is probably like 8 feet high or something like that, 9 feet high. So they'll hit the top of it, but I cut off the tops so they're not mushed against the plastic. Okay, so they have very little upkeep. Okay, 20 to 30 minutes per plant of maintenance per year. Really easy. Very few pests and diseases. And they're no replanting. They're perennial. Zero competition at market. So they got a lot of really attractive qualities to them. Even in disastrous weather event, the plants typically don't die. They just die back to the ground. And Chicago Hardy can actually die back to the ground and still get a crop, whereas a lot of other figs, they only fruit off 1-year-old wood. Chicago Hardy will fruit off of basically prima canes. Gourmet Euro-type restaurants could become highly interested in local figs. However, your best profits are always direct to final customer. You could also do dried figs, fig starts, fig treats. So to summarize, they're easy to grow, but you need a high tunnel and careful espalier training to thrive. Again, you can find that on YouTube. There are Kentucky adapted resilient varieties. Vigorous grow back if there's ever a dieback problem, and the fruit's legendary, highly sought out, but not always by small town Kentucky folk. Fresh fruit would be relatively easy to establish. Gourmet restaurants and local co-ops would be highly interested. Good niche crop for Kentucky growers. Okay, so, They don't require any pollination at all. Yeah, the Japanese or the Chinese name for them was actually like, it was actually like fruit without a flower, because it's just like the fig, just like the fruit. The fig is actually a flower. It's actually an edible flower. So they're very complex, but they don't require any cross pollination. Yes, no problem. Okay, so grapes are something I'm going to glaze over because I don't recommend grapes for Kentucky growers in general. So I'm just going to have to kind of go through this one a little fast here. They do require trellis, mostly grown in Kentucky for wine production. Organic grape growing in the southeast is very challenging. Cultivar selection is vital, about 3 years to production. There are some serious obstacles, and that's our climatic conditions are not favorable. We have early warm-up spells, late spring freezes. These are very hard on grapes. Second, seedless grapes don't do well here, and very few customers want grapes with seeds. Yeah, I consider any type of grape planting a very risky endeavor. UK has some good info on it. Generally, they're plagued by diseases and insects. I'm growing these really rare types called Munson grapes that have done actually pretty well for me. They're from the 1800s. I collected these cuttings, and I have them growing. I also sell these varieties, and they're actually highly disease resistant, but they still produce seeds, and nobody's going to want to buy that typically. Muscadine grapes would be ideal, but they're not cold hardy enough for Kentucky, although I'm trialing some supposedly cold hardy muscadines. Okay, black currants. These are something that really have a lot of potential. So they're related to red and white currants and gooseberries. They're native to Europe. And recently they've gotten more attention as a viable crop. So apologies, I'm going to have to go through these slides a little fast here. It's amazing how fast 3 hours have gone by, but I'm going to have to talk, but go through them a little quickly. So they're bushes. They grow about 4 to 6 feet tall, extremely cold hardy, blooms are frost tolerant, suffer few diseases or insects, and they can handle some light shade. The pea-sized berries are packed with vitamin C. The flavor is really strong, bold and smoky. It's an acquired taste. It's one that I find very delicious. So far in my trials, everyone I'm planting is doing quite well. They're, again, like gooseberries, they require some shade, so like half-day sun would be ideal. Some growers are trialing them in between rows of fruit trees. Under the light shade of the fruit trees, they seem to thrive. Well-drained soil, high organic matter. It's important to prune them in the wintertime. They fruit on 1-year-old wood. The berries ripen in midsummer, and I've seen the bushes extremely loaded with fruit when I was in Germany. There's many varieties. Consort and the Bin series are commonly found, but they're not the best ones for Kentucky. Titania seems like a really good choice. I'm also exploring a lot of other varieties. Powdery mildew and white pine blister rust seem like the two top challenges, so you want to get resistant varieties that are resistant to powdery mildew and white pine blister rust. The soft berries can be marketed in pint or half-pint clamshells. I took this picture in Germany. Those are like white birch, little wooden baskets they were being sold in. There's red currants on the right, black currants on the left. European immigrants would be potentially very, very interested in the fruit. And some are having success with this as a U-pick fruit. Blue Fruit Farm in Minnesota is marketing this fruit, and others in the Midwest. It would involve some educational work, and they have a lot of value-added goods potential: juice, jam, jelly, sauces, and desserts. Gourmet restaurants could be interested. Ethnic Euro-based grocery stores would likely be highly interested. You could also potentially advertise your farm products there as well. So they're easy to grow, small fruit, nearly pest-free, high yield potential. They do best when not planted in full sun. The marketing potential is there, but would require a little bit of extra work. So black currants are definitely a winner. The marketing is going to be the challenging part of those. Okay, Juneberry and serviceberry, pretty similar in all respects to what I just said about black currants. It's in the Rosaceae family. You see the little 5-pointed crown that all Rosaceae family members have, typically, except for a few berries. They grow wild all over Kentucky. They're native to North America. They've recently gotten some renewed attention, especially in New England. So there's two species that will do well here. So take a picture, write down those species: Amelanchier canadensis, Amelanchier crassa grandiflora. Those are the two species you have to focus on if you want to grow Juneberries in Kentucky. Saskatoons are Amelanchier alnifolia. So that is not well adapted, okay, because they're prone to cedar apple rust. And that's the most common Juneberry species you'll find in catalogs. Okay, so this is what berries infected with cedar apple rust look like. And both those species I mentioned earlier, those are resistant to cedar apple rust. Both these species are shrubs and not tree forms. Okay, so there's tree species and bush species. This was actually in the parking lot of Target. Very delicious berries. People were wondering what the heck I was doing. That's never stopped me before. So they're used in landscaping, and they take a few years to establish and start producing fruit. The soft berries look like blueberries, and they're delicious. They've got a grape kind of blueberry flavor. Tiny edible seeds taste like almond extract, and it's very easy to like these berries. Easy to grow, full sun, well-drained soil. They grow about 2 feet a year. Frost-resistant blooms, I'm not sure. I'm still observing that. Seedlings of these do quite well if the parents were good. You got to check the species, okay? And they're grown commercially in Canada, and there's a lot of exploration with these in New England. Berries ripen in June. Typically turn dark purple or blue when ripe. Cedar apple rust, the most notable disease. Insects don't really seem too terrible on them. Deer will browse them. Birds will decimate the whole crop. Okay, they are drawn to these like magnets. So netting them is a necessity. And you want to prune them to make netting easier. So once people taste the berries, they'll want to buy them. Some educational work will be necessary, but they're not a hard sell. They're just so delicious. Old timers know these as sarvis berries, and some very fondly remember them from their youth, and they have some value-added good potential. So this is a summary of them. You got to net them for birds. You got to get the right species. Otherwise, they're really easy to grow, and they do have decent marketing potential. Elderberries. Okay, unrelated to most other fruits. They're native to North America. Also, Europe has a tree form. They're commonly found growing all over Kentucky. And recently, they've gotten a lot of attention for the antiviral properties. These are Bob Gordon elderberries here. They're very easy to grow and produce in 1 to 2 years from planting. Cuttings root rapidly and grow fast. There's not much of any market for fresh berries, value added only. The fresh berries do not taste good. Okay, so I've seen some nurseries make claims of big sweet berries. That's 100%. Underripe green berries may be slightly toxic. Traditionally used in pies, tinctures, wine, and jelly. Cuttings root rapidly and grow fast. Okay, so if any of you all want to try these, we've got some cuttings, and we'll pass those out here in a few minutes. There's not really any market for fresh berries. No one is going to want to buy fresh elderberries typically, unless maybe they want to process them, but that's going to be very few people. The new cultivated varieties boast much bigger berries than wild plants. You get your first yields in about 1 to 2 years. Pinch off the flowers off little bitty plants when you first put them in. They can actually handle slightly wetter sites, but they still can't grow in a swamp or wetland. They need full sun. The berries ripen in mid to late summer, typically around July or August. You can harvest the entire cymes or clusters as shown to the right. And the berries are fragile, and you got to harvest them carefully or the berries will fall off. Commercial growers now tend to bush hog the plants completely down every autumn, and they're only getting primocane fruit, and they find that to be the best way to go about it. So they just bush hog them all. In the spring, a ton of shoots come up. They get berries on them. They harvest the berries. Come fall, they bush hog them down. These are some recommended varieties I've had really good success with. The cuttings that I brought today are Marge. They really suffer a few disease and insect issues. These little guys are elderberry borers. They seem to be one of the worst. The larvae tunnel through the elderberry wood, killing shoots or links of branches. Stink bugs seem to feed on the fruit, but doesn't seem to be that big of a deal. Fresh elderberries have basically zero market demand, value good added only. Dried berries have a market. You know, you see this kind of thing even in mainstream drugstores these days. Most of those berries are coming from Europe. There is a Midwest elderberry cooperative, so you can look this up online, and they are a co-op that will buy berries from you, and they have processing locations and whatnot. So Missouri has done a lot to develop an elderberry scene in their state. So they're extremely easy to grow, do great in Kentucky, basically zero fresh fruit potential. They're mostly seen as medicine, but they have a strong demand in that regard. And you could also try selling your own tinctures and syrups. Make sure to check food safety laws. Okay, so this is one of the coolest fruits we're going to talk about today. Honeyberry. So honeyberries are related to honeysuckle. That's why it's called honeyberry. Not because the berries are honey sweet, because it's related to honeysuckle. Okay, it's native to Canada and tundra regions of Eurasia. It's commonly grown in Canada, Japan, and Europe, or it's commercially grown. Very, very delicious berries. It's not a novelty crop. That's what I thought it was at first. The berries are sweet tart, not honey sweet, sometimes called prairie blueberries. Antioxidant levels are off the charts. They probably got the highest antioxidant levels of any fruit we've talked about today. Fruit ripens in May, right alongside with strawberries, so it's very early. They might do best in Kentucky with half a day of sun. That's how I grow them, or some light afternoon shade, because you got to remember these are tundra plants. They're not acclimated to really hot sun. They're easy to grow. They take time to establish. They fruit in about 2 to 3 years. The freeze-hardy blooms, I've seen them in full bloom, and it hit 14 degrees, and they still made a crop. Cross-pollination is important. You need 2 or more compatible varieties. The flavor is sweet tart with some strawberry and blueberry undertones. It's very addictive and delicious. There's a small machine harvester called a waxwing. Okay, birds. Once the birds taste these, it's over. They'll try to eat them all. So you got to net them. Stink bugs show interest. The fruit develops so fast and is gone by June, thus reducing disease and insect pressure because it comes on and it's gone so fast. You got to give good airflow, though, and adequate sun exposure for powdery mildew reduction. Like gooseberries, they look very rough by August. Like they'll look brown and defoliated, but that's not a problem. I've heard deer can get interested, but I've not seen that myself, but I've heard some growers say that deer will browse on them. Once people taste these, they'll buy them. Half pint clamshells, value added potential. They're said to make great jam. Dried, it seems like they'd be really good. They have tiny, tiny little seeds like blueberries. You don't even notice them. They're not shown to be invasive whatsoever. Yeah. So to summarize, they're easy to grow, fruit ripens very early, birds are the only major hurdle, and they're very delicious and gaining in popularity. So the last fruit we're going to talk about today is Aronia. And we've got some Aronia jam here. So my start with Aronia was I bought some plants from a nursery, and they sent me a free Aronia plant, and I was just like, what the heck is this? And I was like, well, I might as well plant it. And now it's one of my favorite small fruits. So they're related to apples and pears again. The rosacea, you see the 5-pointed crown on the bottom. They look kind of like little apples. They're grown commercially in Poland and other parts of Europe. The berries are barely edible when raw. Okay, so this is the cooking fruit. They're quite astringent. Once they're cooked and sweetened, they're delicious and have a plum berry flavor that's complex and rich, extremely high in antioxidants. They grow into a shrub reaching about 7-8 feet tall, 5-6 feet wide. Blooms aren't harmed by frost. They're basically problem-free. Deer will eat the leaves, so you do need to cage them the first few years while they're establishing. They produce fruit in about 2 to 3 years from planting. They need full sun, well-draining soil, don't require cross-pollination. They compete well with weeds and grass once they're established, and there's not much to it. You just plant them. Growers are marketing Aronia, but it's not easy. The highly astringent berries don't help sell it. So you got to educate that this is a cooking fruit. Just like potatoes are a cooking vegetable. You're not just going to eat raw potatoes. Some fruits you don't just eat raw. They could be marketed to processors, chefs, and adventurous cooks. Wine, I don't know. They could possibly have market potential with European immigrants who are more used to them. The berries freeze well. So this is homemade Aronia jam. I cook the berries in a tiny bit of water, crushing them as they cook to release juice and help the berries cook. I cook them for about 45 to 60 minutes, stirring regularly. Once it's cool, I add raw honey. So you gotta add a lot of honey because these are astringent. You might also want to add a little bit of stevia extract, and that keeps you from using any white sugar. Okay, so the Aronia seeds make the texture slightly grainy. I've not experimented with trying to remove the seeds, but it's likely impractical. So for marketing, you got to expect to engage in lots of educational work. Blue Fruit Farm in Minnesota successfully markets this fruit. I interviewed them for the berry grower. Aronia is perfectly adapted to Kentucky, and it thrives here, making it tempting to try to make it work because they're so productive and they're so easy to grow. Perhaps you could grow them for making supplements. The berries freeze well, could be dried easily, being airy and pulpy like apples. And they're just a solid backyard fruit. And of course, like I said, they do require cooking and sweetening. What do you all think about Aronia jam? Good? The best? It's my favorite jam. Did some of you all think it was not good? The response seems a little bit less enthusiastic about Aronia than the others. Okay, they haven't tried it over here yet. Did you all try it in the back yet? Okay, a bunch of you all haven't had it. Then maybe that's why. So, this is my book, The Berry Grower. So if this topic is of strong interest, please consider buying a copy on Amazon or the ebook version. You can get a new copy that supports my work. Also, pawpaws, the Complete Growing and Marketing Guide. I'm giving a talk on pawpaws for an hour and a half tomorrow. So if you're interested in pawpaws, you can make it to that talk. And any questions? My books are for sale on the table outside. I didn't know that. Oh, great. Any questions? Uh-huh. That's a good question. You want to check the berry grower. It'll be in there. I don't have all this stuff memorized. Uh-huh. They grow the same. And red currants and white currants do well here too. I don't think they're as productive, and they're probably not as marketable as black currants, but they do well here. Why aren't blueberries mentioned in here? I'm just going to be honest. I'm the worst blueberry grower probably in the state. I can grow them in containers in the nursery beautifully all day long. As soon as I put them in the ground, they just like instantly die. So blueberries are challenging to grow. They require super specific soil conditions and pH. They're not really very adapted to Kentucky for that reason. Some people grow them successfully. I'm not one of those people. And because I have a limited amount of time, I didn't want to pretend like I knew what I was talking about with blueberries. So I do cover them in the book, though, briefly. Uh-huh. I don't think I had any. I'll tell you, the indigo gem. I've also had good success with the Japanese varieties Tana, T-A-N-A, and Keiko, K-E-I-K-O. And there's also the Blizzard series, Boreal series, Boreal, B-O-R-E-A-L, Boreal series. There's Boreal Blizzard, Boreal Beast, Boreal Beauty. Those all do really well. You basically want to focus on the newer varieties. They're sweeter and better quality than some of the older ones. So those ones I mentioned are really good. Any more questions? Uh-huh.
Going back to fig pollination or not even pollination, can you talk about the fig wasp? Because I've heard a lot about that being necessary for fig pollination, but
Sure. So the figs that grow in Kentucky are referred to as common figs. And so common figs don't require pollination. Now there's varieties that are grown in the Middle East and Africa and the West Coast that require pollination. So there are what's called a capra fig, and a capra fig is a male fig that produces pollen but not edible fruit. And in order for the pollen to be transferred from the capra fig to the female fig, the required pollinator is a tiny wasp. So the wasp will go inside the capra fig, get covered in pollen, come out, fly inside the female fig, and transfer the pollen that way. In Kentucky, we don't have the wasp. We probably never will. We don't have capra figs, and we have common figs that'll produce without pollination. So basically, on the entire eastern United States, we only grow common figs. On the West Coast, they can grow varieties that require pollination because they have capra figs, and they imported the wasp, and it naturalized in California. Any other questions?
Yeah. I have two big elderberry trees in my yard. Are those, did you say, not native or what?
They're trees?
Yeah.
If they're trees, they're probably not the native species because the native species grows like a multi-stem shrub that typically only gets about maybe 10 feet tall. I have seen them in Europe with a trunk in like the tree form.
Would it make any sense to dry the berries? I have a little fruit dryer.
As long as you're 100% sure they're elderberries, because I've never seen those in Kentucky. I mean, there's a lot of plants that look like elderberries, so I would just make sure that they're actually the correct species before you poison yourself. Because I've seen things that look like elderberries growing on trees, and they're not elderberries. Uh-huh.
in your fig python that's 50 foot long, how wide is it?
It's probably about 10, 12, maybe 12 feet wide. It's not huge. Yeah. Uh-huh.
When would you recommend transplanting, from your nursery to somebody else's property?
April. Yeah, April or May is a great time. It's usually best to transplant fruit plants when they're dormant, and I mostly deal in bare root stock that's shipped out dormant. So April's really the time to do it in Kentucky. I used to do it in March, and I found that was a little too early because if I got the plants to customers in March, sometimes we'd have a warm up, they'd start to bud, and they'd get frosted on, and then they got a really bad start. So typically April. And that's my phone number. That's the email address for the business. You can also find us on Instagram at Peaceful Heritage Nursery and also on YouTube, Peaceful Heritage Nursery. and that's the website where you can find all of our plants and other products we sell. We also sell cuttings, seeds. We do some Kentucky resilient vegetable seeds also. So, what did you all think of the Aronia jam? Good? Did anybody not like it? It's not gonna hurt my feelings if you didn't like it. I just want to know. No one thought it was. It was a little, the gritty, a little gritty. Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. Better than raw. Yep. I saw a question over here. Uh huh. Elderberries, you can pretty much stick them in the ground and they'll grow. But other cuttings, like, I mean, some of the cuttings are just for doing grafting, but I do sell like fig cuttings. But I recommend people start those in containers of like potting soil. Do you have a question? Anybody? Uh-huh. Right. Well, I mean, you're trying to like invigorate wild plantings or replace them with something that would do well. I see. Well, Masanobu Fukuoka said, whatever weeds are growing on your property shows you what species would do well on your site. So if you've got wild brambles and some wild huckleberry or blueberry species growing there, those might be things to focus on. Or no, but like other like cultivated bramble species. Like wineberries are bramble. So that shows that brambles would grow well there. So as far as that, I mean, it depends on how steep, because, you know, building trellises and for blackberries and things on a steep mountainside sounds like a great time to me. But if it's not that steep, you know, it depends on the level of the slope. But if it's not that steep, then hillsides and things can be really good for fruit production because they have good air drainage, they have good water drainage. It just really depends on access, how much work you want to put into it, and how steep it is. You know, you got to think about the practicalities of it. But, you know, sounds like it's already producing some fruit, so you could grow similar species. And as far as the varieties you were asking about, it just depends on the style of production that you want to go for. So, like if you want to do trellising, you're going to want to plant semi-erect blackberries or erect blackberries for the trellis system and all that. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm.
Kind of to piggyback on that, if you do have a lot of slopes on your property, do you recommend, you know, if you had your choice of north, south, east, west facing, have
Mm-hmm.
you seen any influence of that on the success of your plants, or like, you know, early flowering that
Right.
like freezes and things like that?
So a south-facing slope is going to hasten blooming and budding, which is not good. It's going to be warmer and sunnier, so plants are going to want to bud and bloom faster. So a north-facing slope can work well for things like honeyberry and gooseberry and things that need a little bit of shade, as long as it's not too shaded. You know, sometimes you're talking like a holler might only get like 3 hours of sun a day or something, so that's not going to be very conducive. Black raspberries can handle some shade. So I would say that in general, like an east or west facing slope is generally good, because it's going to get pretty good sun, like at least like half a day of good sun, and then like partial shade the rest. But really in a mountainous situation, it boils down to the hours of sun exposure. So there has to be a certain threshold of hours of sun, or the plants are just going to really struggle to produce and survive. There any other questions? So we have some cuttings and pots and potting soil here. If anybody wants to play around with elderberries, you can go ahead and come on up here, and we'll get you a free cutting and a pot here. And I hope you all learned something today. Thank you all very much for coming.